from what I've observed, you guys always have this almost tangible bond that radiates that you don't see in a lot of couples. You know, there's definitely a closeness there, and the fact that you've been together for so long, a lot of people don't have that over a time period. They kind of drift apart. You know, I've been through the same thing with someone for 20 years. You know, but to actually still have that connection is very commendable. You know, so it does show that you guys have found a balance emotionally as a harmony together. You know, and we're only doing this cautionary tale so you maintain that, you know, and you know, avoid any pitfalls as life continues, because eventually the more and more time that goes on, you might stumble a little because of those roles he's talking about.
Well, people ask for the biggest lesson given is don't try to change your partner. Let them be who they are.
Yeah.
You go and that's why, like, we waited to get married. When people ask us when we got married, what changed? They're like, you feel different. We're like, no, nothing changed.
We feel the same.
If you expect your partner to change when you get married, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
You want that same person to carry over into the marriage. You don't want something different.
Let me reframe that a bit, because I think you're correct, but I want to say this a little differently, which is, I don't think you should ever ask the other person to change unless you do. Like, and when I add that caveat is because there are very real things in relationships, in some relationships, perhaps not in yours, but in some, where very real behavioral change needs to happen. And what you guys are sort of pointing at is the changes that happened with you happened in an organic fashion, right? You two were willing to talk about how things impacted you.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other person had a choice to do so, but it was never forced upon them, it was never coerced. The thing is that there are times and circumstances where we do need to change. Not for our partner, it's never for them.
For yourself.
Right.
But for yourself, but also for the relationship. I like to think of relationship as the third entity. Right? Love is the underlying foundation of the situation, but the relationship, it's nothing more than a social contract. I think it is like an energetic entity. And depending on how much work you put into it, how much time, effort, love, communication, that entity can either be incredibly healthy or it can be dying. And so the issue you get into is that to keep that part healthy, to keep that aspect of that third entity healthy, is you have to put in care, and you have to be able to speak to your needs. There's a great form of communication I love called nonviolent communication, where they talk about speaking about what you observed, what your feelings were, right? What your needs are in the situation, and then what the behavioral change is. Because you may not want your partner to change, or they can be the fun-loving asshole or whatever they are the rest of their life. But if they're doing a behavior that's impacting you negatively, you can, if it's part of your needs, ask for that change. They are then, in that situation, able to say, do I want to do this or don't I? If they do, great, then the relationship continues. If they don't, then you guys may have to readdress it and kind of reformat the relationship. Right? That's kind of the situation. So I guess what I'm pointing at is just being aware of that in some ways, yeah, you guys never asked each other to change, but you did change.
Yeah.
You're not the same person you were 5 years ago.
No.
If you were, I'd tell you you're lying. You're not the same person you were at age 5. You're not the same person you were at age 10. You're not the same person you were at age 20.
No.
You are an evolving self. This is why in Buddhism what we talk about is there's no permanent self nature. The thing you call a self is ever shifting, ever changing.
We may have core values that stay the same, that make us up internally, but other aspects, you're going to grow and evolve. That's part of living.
Absolutely, and the thing is that if you actually look at the research, the thing you call a self comes and goes, it disappears. When you're in deep dreamless sleep, are you there? But there's still an awareness time passed, so who the hell remembered that? We get into this thing about different waves of consciousness and how the mind works. The self comes and goes, it changes, it dies every moment, it resurrects and resurrects in a new format every moment. So maybe slightly, maybe a whole bunch, but it changes. And so realize that you guys have been changing and impacting off each other. Now granted, it was never forced, it was never coerced, but realize that you guys have changed, and perhaps, quite frankly, for the better, by impact or by interaction with one another. So yeah, something did change, and it was just the natural course of things. It's just the rock in the river causing it to split, right? It's the natural course of change as opposed to anything forceful.
Great. I think we've had a positive influence on each other.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We have to
it
kill
definitely
each other.
shows.
Well, that's good. No attempts, right?
I'm sure there's time we wanted to, but
We might imagine in our mind, but we never get to
During the worst of fights, there was like, I know where that knife is. It's okay. I'm good.
Good.
Excellent. So I wanted to come back to you real quick, as we were talking earlier about you're interested in tutoring. You're also talking about your partner in therapy. And I know he's not here, so I don't want to speak too much about him, behind his back. But I guess if you can, from your perspective, I think there's a mirror here, which is I want to kind of speak to what you were talking about earlier, is that the impact his mental illness and some of the difficulties he's having has on you, and the amount of support he's asking for. Because I think there's a mirror here in kind of seeing where your situation may be stuck, and maybe a situation where that perception on the other side, because in a lot of ways that's a different that's an exact opposite of the situation you're in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I guess how does that impact you?
I'm not sure. Like how does my situation?
Yeah, how does this reliance on you, his need for
It depresses me because it just brings me down with him being down all the time. And,
yeah.
And then I get stuck and not wanting to do things.
Do you naturally have depressive tendencies?
Naturally, but not it's gotten worse over the years.
Yeah. So it's almost like you ping off each other. So his depression comes up,
Yeah.
and then by definition it brings up yours as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. So there's this way in which it starts creating a feedback loop. Right. It starts pulling yours up, which in turn probably is bringing his depression up more.
Right.
Because he either sees how he's impacting you or sees that you're depressed at very least. Right. And so notice the difference is that in your guys' situation, there's no loop. Right, this is you kind of spinning your wheels in your head on a concern for him that may or may not be warranted. And what you may be observing is actually him putting in too much effort for himself and not based on anything you're doing. Right, as opposed to this situation where you eventually do get these loops, where eventually somebody is suffering enough that they then can drag their partner down because they put their partner in a role they shouldn't. There's a very big difference between having support, succor, and having tenderness and having either a mental health intervention or a coaching intervention, some way in which somebody can be that third party. As I was telling you before we had the camera on, there's a thing in psychology we call triangulation. And one of the things is we do it naturally as humans. So it'd be like if I have an issue with you, instead of talking to you, I go talk to Eric. Right?
That's why we have best friends and vent to them.
Yeah. The problem is that can get unhealthy, right? So you get into the issue of the worst version is two parents fighting and they start talking about each other to their kid. But actually, one of the things, and I told you as a kid earlier, is cheating is actually a form of triangulation. One of my teachers in my master's program said very clearly, why do people cheat? And everyone's like, oh, for sex, for this, for that. And they're like, no, to stay in the relationship. Because the things that they wanted to leave you, they just would.
Right.
But they want to stay in the security of that situation. They want to stay in their life as it is, while also getting whatever that need is met.
Yeah, they're missing something.
Yeah. And that may not be something anything their partner's not giving them, it just maybe some aspect. Maybe it's the taboo or the secrecy, maybe it is sex and the relationships become loveless, whatever it may be. So triangulation is something that can be very dangerous, but from a professional perspective, it's very important to have that and have somebody that you can bring these things to in that counseling context. So
Yeah, he's advocating therapy as opposed to cheating.
Yeah, and that wasn't the analogy I was making, but I suppose you could pull that from it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify in case somebody misunderstood what
I
was
want to be
going
very
on.
clear that your mental health professional should not be doing anything that your mistress should. Just to be very, very clear.
Have to have
If
a
so,
little
they've now
levity.
crossed an ethical boundary. Please see ACA Code Act 2014. That's fine.
Just had to put a little levity in there.
It's fine. But where else are people getting stuck? What else do you see in your life or your relationships that is a struggle? I know for me, we've been adapting this class since we started it. As time's gone on, originally it was here are things that are helpful in conflict. It was very ordered and very rigid. And then as time went on, we were by the time we got to convocation this last year in February, it was basically wow, we've had a shitty year. 2017 was the year of the harrowing. It was everybody had a bad year.
Everybody in the audience had a story.
That's how I'm here this year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir on
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where we sat there and went, okay, so do we want to keep doing this as a professional structured thing, or do we want to just say, hey, here's where the rubber meets the road. Here's where actual conflict comes up. And so we were talking about, you had basically lost a $250,000 house.
Yeah. It was a
Right.
big fall.
Yeah. I had started having panic attacks, actually. So middle of summer, just started having these tremendous panic attacks. Since then, I figured out kind of what's going on. But there was a point where, like, being in that position of, like, hey, hours upon hours on the cushion, practice, all this stuff, and going, I'm back to being, absolutely vulnerable and terrified in a way that I'd never been in quite some time, or at least haven't been in some time. And so it's like, the thing I think I want to make clear with this is that the whole point of these things is not for us to come in some sort of like superior role and say we have all the answers. It's that
We're just as damaged as everybody else. We just
sometimes more so. But the thing is, I think actually giving people the opportunity to troubleshoot some of this stuff from the perspective, because we've both had, I'll say the kind version, we've had very interesting lives.
oh yeah.
Interesting's a good filler word.
Go back to the beginning of the recordings of the book if you really want to know.
Yeah, and so I think in a lot of ways, talking about this stuff I think is really helpful in giving people these opportunities to be able to get this stuff out there, because I don't think we have a lot of, especially in these kinds of communities, pagan or just eclectic spirituality, stuff like that. There's not a lot of opportunity to talk about these kinds of conflicts. It's happening more and more, but it can often get whitewashed under magical thinking, or it can get whitewashed in a way where it's like, oh, we just need to paint this sigil and it'll be fine. I was like, maybe, but there's also the chance of like, there may also be need for a very real intervention, real way to actually look at things, be that through a mental health professional, a teacher, or something.
Right.
So,
I'm always more of a hands-on dig into the real root of the problem instead of something more obscure, because I'm a very practical, pragmatic human being, and some of the events that we attend, that we help people at, tend to be more metaphysical in nature and New Age spirituality. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I'm trying to help provide them a balance between their spiritual side and their more deeper emotional side. In a way, finding that balance between, because everybody has a spiritual or religious side to them. I don't care what your faith is, or even if you're an atheist. You need to have that balanced out with the more pragmatic, mundane, everyday life problems that we all cope with.
yeah, I mean, in some ways, one of the different communities, I think, suffer from different, I don't want to say the pathologies, I wouldn't go that far, but I would say different interesting quirks. And one of them is, at least in like the sort of New Age, pagan kind of thing, is there's a tendency to be very head in the clouds, right? My spirit guides will help me with the schizophrenia. And it's like, yeah, those things can be very powerful, very helpful. We have research to show that. Like, spirituality is incredibly powerful at dealing with mental illness, or just dealing with overall life contentment. But it's not the only factor, right? You can have as much, spiritual oomph as you would like, but if you're still, lacking food, then, that's not very much you can do about that.
Right.
Spirituality is not going to help that in some ways. So in some ways, I think what you're talking about is kind of creating this more middle path, this more bridge of,
Yes.
It's not give up your beliefs, or in some way downing your beliefs, but it's saying
It's
that,
almost enhancing it on the side.
yeah,
It's more, and I'm a big fan of Carl Jung under Sigmund Freud, where his approach was the gods are like what Joseph Campbell said. They're archetypes. They're helpful aspects of our mental personality. Whether you believe they're real or not, that's totally irrelevant to me. The fact is that you use them, and I won't go so far as to say a crutch, but that's what religion is to some degree for a lot of people, no matter what your faith is. When the bottom line, at the end of the day, it comes down to how are you contending and coping with these archetypes, with these deities, with a god, versus how you're behaving because of how you emotionally process everything in your head, emotionally and spiritually, or with people in the mundane world. Because even Jung would talk about the power and the idea behind tarot. He wrote a lot about that versus the clinical hardcore psychology that he learned from his mentor.
yeah. Well, and it's like you get into an interesting place where, in my opinion, like, I wouldn't say spirituality is a crutch. That's a little far from me, but I would say that one of the things we get into is can you hold your spirituality in a multifaceted, not right? Like, if you're 100% sure that the Norse gods are it, and you're not willing to entertain any other kind of concept, how is that healthy? How is that a way in which to be to use the name of the website Limitless, or how is that a way to be free flowing, thinking, adapting, evolving? In my opinion, you can hold the idea that these are archetypes. You can also hold the idea that these are actual spiritual beings. You can hold the idea that these are actual energetic forces that we've kind of characterized into these particular formats. You can even get into the idea that the two are interacting and that these things have actually taken format because of the way human perception works, and they may or may not have been that at one point.
Collective unconscious.
Either collective unconscious or human interaction of collective unconscious with spiritual entities. You can go any which direction. Now, the question I contend with is, can you hold all of those perspectives? Even in the midst of ritual, even in the midst of practice, even truly awake is being able to hold as many perspectives as possible about the thing you're doing, and then at the end of the day looking and goes, well, it works. Right? If you see genuine value in your life for it, and it works, then do it. The truth of it in some ways is irrelevant if it's functioning for you.
Right, and that was my basic point.
Yeah.
I was just rather long-winded about it. He got to the point.
Yeah, so I think in this notion of conflict orientation, it's like, how do we limit the level of conflict we have in our lives? Well, first I would say is define conflict. Like you two fight, right? Occasionally, once every 10 years or so.
And we always joke about, like, people say don't go to bed angry. We've gone to bed angry, and then we wake up in the morning and go, what were we fighting about? I don't know.
If you forget it, because like we do go to bed like really pissed off at each other, like, but then wake up next day. Well, what was it
What
about?
was the big deal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're in a new state. You're no longer in fight or flight if you've gotten triggered or whatnot. You're in a different way of being.
Yeah.
I would also say is if you don't go to bed angry, how can you have angry sex? Like it's just the fact of the matter is like if you're not allowed to go by the bed when you're angry, that just makes the kitchen really awkward in case the kids get up. Like it's just it's not good. So I would say that actually like to some degree one of the things we have to talk about here is what conflict are we aiming for? Are you aiming for healthy conflict or are you aiming for unhealthy conflict? To me, conflict is always and ever will be a conflagration. It's fire, right? The difference being is unhealthy conflict is burning down everything. You see those wildfires that happen every summer in California. They take out people's houses. They take out entire towns. To me, that's what a healthy conflict does. It has no discernment. It burns down everything.
Yeah.
Healthy conflict is like a really well-set forest fire.
Yeah.
Like the ones the
It
Forest Service
clears an
set up.
area and new growth.
Absolutely. What it does is it creates the opportunity for change. To me, anger, without all of the additional nonsense, without all the triggers and the fear dressed up as anger nonsense, that's what triggers are, is their fear either dressed up as anger or shame. The truth is real anger, clean anger, is nothing more than a recognition of either the unjust or the unfair.
And to some people, expressing anger is the only thing they feel they're allowed to do, and it's the only way they can really cleanse and get it off their chest, because suddenly everything's just out because you're not thinking of those barriers of what society expects you to hold things in check. And it can be unhealthy if you do, because you're bottling it all up and then it explodes like a tea kettle, and you need to get these things out to talk to each other. Otherwise somebody would never know what you're really thinking that's holding you back and frustrating you. So I think that's part of it.
I agree, and I think the thing is that we are naturally addicted to catharsis. So the tendency is like, you have these explosive things with anger, and you're like, man, I feel so much better, and everyone around you's like crying and on fire.
And then you feel like an asshole.
Yeah, well, yeah, hopefully. I mean, the thing is that, and so it starts to negatively associate you sharing your feelings with that. I have clients where it's like they avoid sharing feelings, they avoid sharing any kind of affect, because the perception is when they have these explosions, be them emotional breakdowns, anger fits, whatever it is, that they suddenly are not allowed to be them, or their emotions are harmful or hurtful. And the truth is, well, no, it's that you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by repressing all of this and hiding your emotions. You're setting up for either an explosion or a breakdown, right? Like, the real thing about anger is what anger really should be is the opportunity to tell your partner or society or whoever you're interacting with that something doesn't work for me, that something's wrong here, right? And by being able to share that and be able to interact with that, hopefully create some kind of behavioral change, at the very least in your relationships.
Yeah. There was a couple I was helping last month, and the guy is the very stoic type. He's not one to share his feelings. You can't even read him usually, and he can act like an asshole sometimes just to basically hide. He uses his sense of snarky humor as an armor to society. And the female was, very emotional, like you were saying, and she was crying. The guy wasn't really showing much, and they were having problems because she wasn't pulling her own weight in the relationship, and he was trying to help her figure out, well, do this, and then I'd care about you more, and stuff. It was along
That's a
those
great
lines.
statement.
I know. I'm paraphrasing, an hour's worth of
Yeah, fair enough.
coaching.
That hurt me just hearing the paraphrase.
What it came down to is he finally lost that stoic self-control by getting angry and looking at her, and he just turned to her and just belted out, "Well, I've always loved you," and she never hears that from him. And in that moment, he was able to release that deep, true emotion, because he finally it bottled up and poof, out it came, and that was healthy. It was the first time in a very long time that they were able to open up that much.
Well, and I'd even argue, like, I even disagree with the initial thesis. It's like, well, she's not pulling her part in the relationship. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Right? Like, yeah, she may not be pulling it in the financial sense, but where are you emotionally?
Right.
Like,
and
if
now
you look at him and go, oh, it's a black hole, like, that's not helpful in any way, shape, or form.
And now she's more financially stable and emotionally stable. She's taking her medication, and the guy is looking more like the jerk, even though he's financially well off and appears stable from the outside, because he hasn't dealt with his emotional crap. Because he bottles it up and stamps it down so hard. She looks more stable in every aspect than he does. And before it appeared the other way around.
I know what you're saying. Every relationship needs to be a two-way street. You can't just expect your partner to do everything you want and not provide anything back.
Right.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, it's like, people like to have zero-sum. Humans are really good at, like, black and white thinking. And so if you're focusing on one particular domain, then yeah, it's very easy to seem like your argument is the strong one, right? Like, for example, if we just looked at your situation, yeah, you're the one bringing in the financial side of the relationship. That's where you're coming from. That's what you helped her provide.